At my sister-in-law's wedding, my mother-in-law placed both of her manicured hands against my chest and pushed me down the grand staircase of my own home. I tumbled down 14 hardwood steps in my silk dress, felt something crack deep inside my spine, and landed in a broken heap on the marble floor, while 200 wedding guests gasped above me. Through a haze of blinding pain, I watched my own husband step around my twisted body, straighten his tie, and tell the crowd that I had been drinking since breakfast. They thought a fall could silence me and a forged signature could steal the house I built my life around. They had no idea that a wedding drone was hovering just outside the tall staircase window, recording every second in crystal clear detail, and that the woman they had just thrown away was about to dismantle their entire family in front of the whole state of Washington. Before I share the painful details of my story, I have a quick question for you. Where in the world are you watching this from right now, and what time is it over there? Drop it in the comments below. I absolutely love seeing where my global family is tuning in from. It gives me so much strength. Go ahead and type your city and your time right now, because what you are about to hear next will completely shock you. My name is Vanessa. I am 32 years old, and I am a senior architect in Seattle. Nothing about my life was handed to me. I was raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night, a woman who came home at 6 in the morning smelling of bleach and still made me breakfast before school. She used to tell me that the only roof a woman can ever truly count on is the one she pays for herself. I carried those words through architecture school, through years of unpaid internships and instant noodles, through the brutal licensing exams, and through every condescending meeting where men twice my age assumed I was there to take notes. By my late 20s, I had fought my way up to senior architect at one of the most respected firms in the Pacific Northwest, and my designs were winning awards across the state. And then I did the thing I had been dreaming about since I was a little girl sleeping on a pull-out couch. I bought a house. Not just any house. A neglected craftsman home sitting right on the shore of Lake Washington, with sagging porches, broken windows, and the most beautiful bones I had ever seen. I paid $950,000 for it, every cent from my own savings and my own salary, with the deed recorded in my name alone, years before I ever met my husband. I spent 2 more years restoring it with my own hands and my own drawings. I rebuilt the wraparound porch. I designed the grand staircase myself, a sweeping curve of oak and iron beneath a 2-story window that catches the sunrise off the lake. That house was not real estate to me. It was my mother's words made solid. It was proof that the girl from the pull-out couch had built her own roof. It was around that time that I met Julian. He was handsome, polished, and impossibly charming, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and your grandmother's birthday. He worked in finance, came from what everyone called an old Seattle family, and spoke about his parents with a reverence that I, a girl who never had a big family, found beautiful. I see the red flags now, of course. I noticed that for all their country club talk, his parents never picked up a single check. I noticed that his mother, Patricia, toured my home on her first visit like an appraiser, trailing her fingers along the banister of my staircase and murmuring that the place had real legacy potential. I noticed that his younger sister, Brooke, started calling the lake house our family place within a month. I noticed all of it, and I explained all of it away because I was in love, and because I was still that little girl who desperately wanted to belong to a family. We married 2 years ago in a small ceremony on my back lawn, and Julian moved into my house, and that is when the slow, polite invasion began. Patricia began hosting her garden club luncheons in my home without asking me. Brooke began bringing friends over to swim off my dock while I was at work, leaving wet towels on my drafting table. My father-in-law, Richard, began giving guests tours of the property, pointing out features I had personally designed and describing them as old family craftsmanship. At dinner parties, I would hear Patricia tell people that the estate had been in the family for 3 generations, and when I gently corrected her, she would laugh her tinkling little laugh and say that I was such a literal girl. Julian never once defended me. He would squeeze my hand under the table and whisper that his mother was just proud, that it cost us nothing to let her dream, but it was costing us. It was costing me. Because behind the designer clothes and the club memberships, I slowly discovered that Julian's old Seattle family was a hollow shell. The legacy money was gone, devoured decades ago by Richard's failed ventures and Patricia's bottomless appetite for appearances. The condo my in-laws lived in was mortgaged to the rafters, and I eventually learned that Julian had been quietly covering their payments every month out of our joint account, which meant out of my salary, because his commissions had been imaginary for over a year. When I confronted him, he wept and called it a rough patch. When I mentioned it to Patricia, she looked at me with cold reptile eyes and said that family takes care of family, and that a woman who counts pennies against her own husband is not really a wife. The warning that saved my life came from my best friend, Naomi. Naomi and I have known each other since architecture school, before she switched paths and became an attorney. One evening over wine, I mentioned, almost as a joke, that Julian had been pestering me for weeks to sign refinancing paperwork for the lake house, paperwork he was strangely eager to have signed at his buddy's office instead of at our bank. Naomi did not laugh. She put down her glass, looked me dead in the eye, and told me to sign absolutely nothing. The next morning, she helped me place a title monitoring alert on my property with the county recorder, a simple free service that sends an immediate notification if anyone ever files a document against your deed. I remember thinking it was paranoid. I remember Naomi saying that paranoid is just a word people use for prepared women. 3 months later, Brooke got engaged to Connor, the soft-spoken heir to a hotel family from Vancouver with more money than our entire neighborhood combined. And Patricia, drowning in debt but addicted to grandeur, made an announcement at Sunday dinner that made my stomach drop. The wedding would be held at the family estate, my house. 200 guests, a string quartet on my lawn, the bride descending my grand staircase beneath my 2-story window. I said no. I said it politely, then firmly, then desperately. And then Julian sat me down, held my hands, and told me that if I humiliated his mother and ruined his sister's wedding, our marriage was over. God forgive me, I caved. I told myself it was one day, one single day of generosity, and then perhaps they would finally accept me. The morning of the wedding, my phone buzzed at 7 with a notification I did not understand at first. It was the county recorder alert. A quitclaim deed had been filed against my property at opening hour, a document claiming to transfer my lake house out of my name, bearing a signature that was supposed to be mine, notarized by a name I recognized as one of Julian's poker friends. I stood in my own kitchen in my silk robe, surrounded by florists and caterers, staring at my phone while my hands went ice cold. They had not even waited for me to sign. They had simply manufactured my consent. I called Naomi, who was already dressed for the wedding as my guest, and she told me to act completely normal, to smile, to pour champagne, because she was making calls, and because everything that happened in that house today needed to happen in front of witnesses. So I smiled through the longest afternoon of my life. I smiled while Patricia greeted Connor's parents at my front door and welcomed them to 3 generations of family history. I smiled while Richard gave the hotel magnate a tour of my library and took credit for my blueprints. And I was still smiling barely when I climbed to the staircase landing during cocktail hour to fetch the bride's grandmother a shawl, and found Patricia waiting for me by the tall window, holding a leather folder and wearing the smile of a woman holding 4 aces. She did not waste time on pleasantries. She opened the folder and showed me a copy of the quitclaim deed, my forged signature sitting on it like a wound. She told me, in the calm voice of a woman discussing seating charts, that the house was being announced tonight as Brooke's wedding gift, the family estate passing to the family daughter, exactly as Connor's parents had been promised. She told me that I could either stand beside Julian and applaud, or I could make a scene and be exposed as a hysterical drunk in front of 200 people, because everyone had already noticed me trembling and pale all afternoon, and the story would write itself. Something in me went very quiet and very clear. I told her the signature was forged, that the filing was a felony, and that she had until the end of the toasts to confess to Connor's family before I called the police myself. I turned to walk down the stairs, and that is when my mother-in-law, in her champagne-colored gown, with the string quartet playing below and her daughter laughing somewhere in my garden, stepped forward and shoved me with both hands, with her full strength, straight down my own staircase. People ask me what I remember about the fall. I remember the world tilting. I remember the iron railing flashing past my fingers, just out of reach. I remember the specific, sickening crunch somewhere in my lower back when I hit the 7th step, and the way the pain did not even arrive at first, as if my body needed a moment to believe what had just happened. I remember landing on the marble floor of my own foyer, unable to feel my left leg, staring up at the chandelier I had restored with my own hands, while 200 faces turned toward me in frozen silence. And I remember with perfect clarity what my family did next. Patricia descended the stairs at a dignified pace, pressing her hand to her heart, announcing to the gasping crowd that I had been unsteady all day, that she had begged me to slow down on the champagne, that she had tried to catch me. Julian pushed through the guests, and for one pathetic heartbeat, I thought he was coming to save me. Instead, he stepped around my broken body, lifted his hands for attention, and told the crowd that he was so sorry, that his wife had been struggling with drinking for some time, and that everyone should please move to the garden and give the family some privacy. Brooke appeared at the top of my staircase in her white gown, looked down at me bleeding on the marble, and said the 11 words I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. She said, "Please get her out of here before the photos start." Not one of them called for help. Not one of them knelt beside me. The person who did was Naomi, who came tearing through the crowd, dropped to the floor in her cocktail dress, and screamed at a waiter to call 911. And the second person was a young man named Marcus, the wedding videographer, who pushed forward holding a tablet with shaking hands. Because Marcus had spent the entire cocktail hour flying his camera drone in slow circles around the house, capturing golden hour footage of the lake, the lawn, and the famous 2-story window above the grand staircase. The drone had been hovering 30 feet from that window, lens pointed directly through the glass, when Patricia raised both hands and shoved me. He had watched it happen live on his monitor. It was all recorded in flawless high definition, and the interior staircase camera, mounted that morning to film the bride's grand descent, had captured it from a second angle for good measure. Naomi took one look at the footage, stood up, and transformed from my best friend into the coldest attorney I have ever seen. She instructed Marcus to back up the files immediately to 3 separate locations. She positioned 2 waiters at the doors and told them that no member of the family was to touch that staircase camera. And when Julian tried to take the tablet from Marcus's hands, claiming family privacy, Naomi stepped between them and informed him, in a voice that carried across the entire foyer, that he was now on camera attempting to destroy evidence of a violent felony and that the police were 4 minutes out. What followed was the fastest collapse of an empire I have ever witnessed. The paramedics strapped me to a board while 2 officers reviewed the drone footage right there in my foyer, in full view of 200 guests in formal wear. I watched from the stretcher as Patricia was turned around and handcuffed in her champagne gown, shrieking that this was a misunderstanding, that I was a drunk, that I had jumped. I watched Connor's father, the hotel magnate, take his son by the shoulder and walk him out of my house without a backward glance, while Connor's mother announced to the remaining guests that there would be no wedding, tonight or ever. And I watched Julian, gray-faced, trying to melt toward the kitchen exit, only to be stopped by an officer who had just taken a very interesting phone call from the county recorder's fraud unit, a call set in motion by the title alert Naomi had filed months earlier. They found the original forged quitclaim deed paperwork in his briefcase, in his study, in my house. At the hospital, the news was brutal. I had a burst fracture of a vertebra in my lower spine. The surgeons operated for 6 hours, fusing the broken segment with titanium screws, and then a soft-spoken doctor sat at my bedside and told me that I would walk again, but that it would take months, and that 2 centimeters in a different direction would have meant a wheelchair for life. I spent 12 weeks relearning how to stand, how to climb a single step, how to sleep through the night. And I want to be honest with you. The physical pain was not the worst part. The worst part was lying awake in that hospital bed, understanding that the people I had cooked for, paid for, and called family had watched me break on a marble floor and worried about the wedding photos. But somewhere in week 2, the grief burned off, and what remained underneath was something cold, patient, and absolutely without mercy. From my hospital bed with Naomi at my side, I declined every settlement feeler from their lawyers, and there were many, because they could see exactly what was coming. When the prosecutor asked me how I wanted to proceed, I gave her one sentence. Press every charge to the maximum that Washington law allows, and do not call me again until you have. The legal avalanche buried all of them. Patricia was charged with first-degree assault for shoving me down the staircase, with the drone footage and the staircase camera making her drunk wife story laughable, especially after my blood work from the hospital came back showing 0 alcohol. Julian was charged with forgery, filing a false instrument, and attempted theft of real property because the quitclaim deed was a confession with his fingerprints on it. His poker buddy lost his notary commission and was charged alongside him for falsely certifying a signature of a woman he had never even met. Richard was charged with making false statements after he swore to responding officers that he had personally watched me stumble, an account that the footage demolished frame by frame. And Brooke, though she escaped criminal charges, did not escape consequences because the entire scandal, including her 11 words about the wedding photos, was witnessed by 200 of the most connected people in Seattle society. And her engagement to Connor was publicly dissolved before midnight. Then I unplugged the money machine, exactly the way my mother taught me. The condo my in-laws lived in had been kept afloat for over a year by mortgage payments flowing quietly out of my salary. I closed that account from my hospital bed with 2 signatures and a notary of my own, a licensed one this time. The bank foreclosed within 4 months. I filed for divorce while Julian was out on bail, and because the lake house was my separate property, bought and deeded years before the marriage, he walked away from our union with his clothes, his debts, and a felony record. The forged deed was declared void by a judge in a hearing that lasted 11 minutes. My roof, the one I paid for myself, came home to me. 8 months after the wedding, I attended the sentencing. I no longer needed the cane by then, but I brought it anyway, and I stood at the podium in that courtroom and looked at the 3 of them at the defense table, deflated, gray, and represented by a public defender because every dollar of their imaginary fortune was gone. The prosecutor played the drone footage on the courtroom screen one final time. The push, the fall. Patricia descending the stairs at her unhurried, queenly pace while I lay broken below. The judge watched it twice, in total silence, and then he did not hold back. Patricia received 9 years in state prison for first-degree assault. Julian received 5 years for forgery and attempted theft of real property. Richard received probation, community service, and a permanent record for his false statements. The notary received 18 months and will never certify a document again. I drove home that evening, parked in my own driveway, and stood for a long time on my rebuilt porch, watching the sun go down over Lake Washington. Then I walked inside, climbed my grand staircase one deliberate step at a time, all 14 of them, and stood at the tall window where a drone once hovered and saved my life. The house was silent. The house was mine. My mother passed years ago, but I swear I could hear her voice in those quiet rooms. The only roof a woman can count on is the one she pays for herself. I have rebuilt my body, my career, and my peace. The garden where a wedding collapsed is now where I drink my coffee and sketch new buildings. And I have learned that love without respect is just a slow invasion, and that the most dangerous predators do not break into your house. They get invited in, and then they redecorate. But standing where I am today, I have to ask you, was I too ruthless for sending my own mother-in-law and my own husband to prison instead of accepting their settlement and walking away quietly? Or did they earn every single year? What would you have done if you woke up on that marble floor? Let me know in the comments below, and if my story gave you strength, please subscribe and hit the bell icon, because tomorrow I will share another true story of justice that you will not believe.